welcome to the Learning Experience powered by CAST. I'm one of your hosts, Kelly Suding.
And I'm Luis Perez.
And I'm Bryan Dean.
We are three educators here ready to break down barriers until learning has no limits. Let's do this.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another Secret Stash of the Learning Experience podcast powered by CAST. Today, I get to share a really incredible interview with our UDL-Con 2025 award recipient in the area of research, Dr. Anya Evmenova. And she's out at George Mason University. I'm going to let her give you her intro and her credentials because, well, you get tired of hearing my voice. So, Anya, welcome. I am so excited to have you here. We've had so many great discussions. And I always walk away from them being so energized and like just ready to dive into more UDL practice. Plus, you're just kind of an inspiring person all around. So I just want to welcome you to the Secret Stash. It's just you and I today. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So how are you? What's going on?
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bryan. And I'm honestly extremely honored to be invited to be a part of the Secret Stash. I was incredibly honored to receive an award, obviously, but this is just an additional wonderful opportunity to talk to you, to share my story. And yeah, I'm super excited. As you mentioned, I'm at George Mason University. I am an associate dean for research in the College of Education and Human Development and a professor in the Division of Special Education and Disability Research. And I've been really a UDL fan for many, many years. And I've shared this story during my acceptance speech, but I will mention it again. UDL really changed my own life, so that's why I've been such a huge fan. I came to United States from Russia in 2001, and as part of the exchange program as an exchange student, I came to East Carolina University and really struggled. It was really, really hard.
Yeah.
It was not easy, and I thought I spoke English, but it was still very hard. I would take hours to complete my readings and, looking up every word in the dictionary.
Right.
I did not say a word for about 6 months because I did not feel confident in my ability to speak. Couldn't really do anything on the computer. I haven't touched a computer before I came here in 2001.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And right before I came, I had a relative who sat down with me and wrote down everything I'm supposed to do when I log into the computer, when I start, the computer, when I sit down at the computer. So kind of like how to check the email. I had no idea what that was. So
Sure.
I had like this list, right, of steps that I had to complete. And I would religiously follow that list, those procedures. And I would go to the library at East Carolina University and kind of follow that list until one day I came too early. And all the computers were off.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. All right.
And
okay.
I did not have a list for that.
Yeah, to turn it. Yeah, to turn it on, get it booted up, everything else. Wow.
It was crazy. And there were some people, obviously, in the library working, but I didn't feel confident that I could go and ask them in English to help me. So I just sat there for about 2 hours waiting until someone just walked by and they were turning on all the computers anyway. And then I was like, okay, now I'm good. Now I can follow. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much I struggled, especially if assignments were on the computer or if I had to do something. Another story I like to share is that my very first assignment was to interview school bus drivers. I didn't know what a school bus was. So I came to the instructor and I said, "What is a school bus? How do I find school bus drivers?" They said, "It's yellow." So I would run around campus trying to find the yellow bus. So it was difficult for me to sort of be successful, to feel successful, to feel confident. I really wanted to leave as soon as possible. I didn't think I was cut out for this. And until I met this one professor who introduced me to this concept. And now I know that it was UDL. At the time I didn't, but she really offered me a lot of choice, and not just me, the whole class.
Yeah.
And that's the premise. So it wasn't accommodating me. It really was for everyone. And finally, I was able to participate. I would participate and I would craft my discussion points. I would just take the time. I would have an ability to choose if I want to interview school bus drivers or somebody else.
Sure.
And I just it just changed everything for me, and that's where I was just destined to learn more about this wonderful framework. And eventually I did talk to this professor and said, this was so helpful. What was it? So she kind of gave me a little introduction to UDL. And I've been very passionate about it since then, and really try to use it as much as I can in my work.
First of all, it's an incredible story. I know you've told it to me before, and I am just, every time I'm still struck with it, because it is this really special journey about agency and about and about systemic barriers, and how systemic barriers or presumptions of culture really get in the way, right? Yeah. Because here you are invited from another university, right? Invited to a university to do work. So it's obvious that you have the intelligence, you have the will, you have the drive, you have all these things. But when you get here, even the startup of the computer is a systemic barrier that is difficult, right, to get through, and impedes the process of the work that is going to lead eventually to you becoming an award winner for your research, right? So like, obviously all of the other pieces were there, but there's this cultural component, or there is this like background knowledge component that wasn't there. And it just really strikes me like, of course you're passionate about this work, right? Because you have such a personal connection to the idea of agency and to the idea of how do we reduce some of those barriers.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And there is also this assumption too, right? Mm-hmm. And, I'm sure that I'm guilty of that as an instructor now, or as a teacher in the past, when you kind of assume that certain things might be a struggle, but certain things should not be a struggle. Right. And unless you have been in the shoes of the person, of a student, you really don't know. So this notion of assuming something is hard to break. Sure. And that's where UDL, to me, and we'll talk about that throughout sort of this interview, but to me, that's where using UDL really as a framework, as it's supposed to be used, as a process, as a design, that's the key, because that what forces you to question your assumptions, to question your sort of understanding of the background, understanding of the needs, understanding of the abilities, and things like that. I agree. It's been a wonderful journey, and I attribute my success a lot to UDL and being able to just do what I could do well.
Right. And I think that I love the fact that you put design in there, because design is a passion. It's like, it's the cornerstone of my work.
Yeah.
And what I love about UDL, and what it doesn't force us to do, but what it puts into light and reframes for us, is this idea that you have a designer bias. Period. Right. You'll always have it, and it will always be in your design. Right. But UDL kind of refocuses us to look at that designer bias, those assumptions that we make, those things that should be easy. Everybody knows what a school bus is. Well, maybe they don't, right? Or maybe the school bus contextually doesn't work here. Whatever it may be, like you examine not only your first assumptions that you generally you would look for anyways, but you also examine some of those other deeper secondary, tertiary assumptions that are a little bit more deeply ingrained or rooted. And then you create options for those. Like the moment that the option was turned over to you, like you don't, do you want to interview school bus drivers, right? Or are you still learning the language or learning the fluency of the language,
Yep,
right? Because you were literate in the language, but the
Absolutely.
fluency is the nuance of the language, right?
Yep.
So while you're still learning that, maybe it's a bit intimidating to have to interview somebody who's a native speaker and understands all of that, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
I really think that's just a great story that shows us your passion for the work, where your work goes, and then also like the real power of UDL. Like the real power of UDL is person to person. It's individual, right? Like it's you're designing for your classroom or your school or your learning or your working environments. But really, what you're ultimately doing is you're putting a human at the center of that design, and you're sharing and co-designing with them, and you're building you're building agency amongst that whole level. And so that's I think your story highlights that so wonderfully, Anya, and I just really love it. And that kind of brings us to, well, where you're at now, right? And so,
Yep.
Like the award, so you won the award for research and practice, the 2025 UDL Con Award, and it's a really strong, like it's the center stone of what CAST was founded on, and it's a very important award. Your award recognizes research that actively, I think that's important, actively advances UDL. So, if you could give us a little breakdown of your research, and then like pinpoint maybe one specific finding from your work that's like altered or expanded the existing framework or guidelines or thought process or zeitgeist of UDL, and then how you designed it that way that's a big question, and I'm trying to phrase it so that it doesn't seem overwhelming, but I just want to know everything. Just tell me everything.
No. As I said, it's been a huge honor to receive this award, and especially to receive it from David Rose at the UDL Con was amazing.
That's the Yonk. That's right.
Just beyond.
David Rose, the Yonk, for sure.
Yeah. And to tell you the truth, since the beginning of my story, which was 2001, he was a frequent guest in my literature reviews. So it was just amazing to meet an actual person and receive an award from him. But I'm not sure if if my research is doing what you said it should do. But I will tell you that I am, as a passionate user of UDL, I do try to really make sure that whatever I do in the UDL sort of realm is based in research and evidence and data. So I hope I am advancing something. I'm not sure if I'm advancing UDL framework, but I will tell you that my research, and I think as I mentioned before, I really use UDL in all different parts of my life. And my research really focuses on there are three strands where UDL really belongs, in my opinion, and where I really rely on UDL. So the first one, it's really about sort of developing and leveraging technology-based applications. My area of expertise is assistive technology. Right. And I really work on developing new technologies and relying on those cognitive supports and sort of inclusive design to ensure that we do provide this education for all. So kind of using UDL principles in my technology design, development, research, implementation is one area of my research. I've also used UDL quite successfully as a way to introduce the power of this inclusive education in my international work. As an international student in the past, I've always been passionate about sharing the word about inclusive education and trying to promote it. And sometimes it is hard. And sometimes you go to countries around the world that are not necessarily ready to attack this inclusive education, including students with disabilities in general education curriculum. In some places, they are ready to do that. They want to do it. They know it's the right thing to do, but they're just scared and kind of taken back by what that means to, a teacher in the classroom. I can't deal with my students in the classroom as is, and now I have to include these students with disabilities as well. And, in some parts of the world, they do have classrooms with 60 students or 70 students in one classroom. So and that obviously makes it very hard to implement this inclusive education. So UDL has been a way for me to really sell this inclusive education idea, because ultimately, and this is why I love UDL, it is about making it better for everybody. So it's not just about supporting this certain group of students, certain group of learners. And that's why it worked for me. I did not have a disability, but I was just coming from a very different background, and I was learning English and English fluency or language fluency as I was going. So that's sort of how I use it in my international work. And then, of course, as a professor at the university, I really have done quite a bit of work with pre-service and in-service teachers and guiding them just towards understanding it. And I think I want to maybe highlight this strand in response to this question and kind of touch on others later, because I feel like something that I believe is super important is modeling.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
It's really not about teaching. It's not about saying, UDL is... and there is a place for that, but that can be done. We have access to so much information these days with the internet, with AI, with anything. I
can get a working definition pretty easily.
Absolutely.
Right. But it is the embodiment of UDL that I think is
really just walking the walk and talking the talk, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing to get across too, isn't it, Anya? Like it's like you have to live into it. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's hard when practitioners start taking up UDL practice, is that they're like, well, but what does it look like? What does it look like?
Exactly.
And the answer, quite honestly, a lot of times is, I'm not sure what it's going to look like for you in your context, but I'm going to model it in the way that I present it to you. And I'm going to show you how it benefits and works in my teaching or my practice or my personal life or whatever it may be in my work, in some way, I'm going to model that and show you. So it is like UDL it's an act of modeling, but it is also a pretty vulnerable thing when you're showing somebody how it works, because you're exposing your practice or exposing your personal story or sharing your personal story. And so it can be just this really, it can be semi-intimate thing. And that's hard sometimes for people to kind of pick up. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I can tell you that I hope that all those in-service and pre-service teachers, I could see the change in them while they were in class. Yes. And the change was not because they suddenly learned something that they have never heard about.
Right.
Or I opened the new world to them. No, most of them have heard about it. Yeah. Most of them said, oh my God, yeah, my school district did some PD and I kind of listened, or I've heard this in my other classes things like that.
Yeah.
And when they would come back at the end of the class and say that it so makes sense, and I'm no longer intimidated by it, because we also tend to, UDL is complex. It's quite large, right?
Yep.
And I think it can be quite intimidating to someone beginning that journey to be like, oh my God, do I need to do all of this?
Right, or exactly.
What is it going to look like in my setting, right? And just by modeling how it could be done, to a lesser degree to a larger degree, like that's when I think people start to relate to it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I also feel like that's where practitioners, and that's why I wanted to touch on this sort of area of my work here, because that's the change. Because if they benefited from it, and I can give you a sort of a very simple example. Before we had all this sophisticated learning management systems, now
Yes.
all these LMSs do it sometimes automatically. But when I started, we didn't have all this sort of technology and all
Sure.
these advances.
Oh,
right?
I remember. As an instructional designer, I remember.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yep.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I would, very simple example, I would create my lectures for my online courses. And I would always have a script. And that was
Yeah.
partially for me because as a English as a language, second language speaker, that always helped me. So
Right.
I was like, well, I already have a script. I could share it, right?
Yeah.
And then I would, out of my video lecture, I would create an audio, the MP3, sort of like the pre-podcast
Right. Absolutely.
format. And then I would have, because when I was recording the lecture, I would have the slides because, I was using the slides as my background. So I would be like, well, I can share that as sort of guiding notes.
Right.
And I would just share all these multiple formats. And it's simple, right? It's like such a simple example. And
Yes.
It's something
Yeah.
like, well, I didn't really, it wasn't that much more work on my part because I
Right.
already held all these pieces anyway.
Exactly.
I just shared.
I think that's a huge, like, I think there are a couple different ways that people come to UDL. And I love the analogy of UDL like a river, right? It is, sometimes it looks pretty narrow, but it is incredibly deep.
Right.
Right. Like we're not talking like it's not an ocean of practice. It is smaller than that in width, but in depth, it is incredible. And when people always ask me like, how long, like, are you an expert or whatever? First of all, I'm never an expert in anything, but when they ask me if I'm an expert on UDL or they have introduced me as an expert on UDL, I'm always like, no, because my journey, like I'm still exploring the depths.
Absolutely.
Right. Like and I'm always coming back. I'm like, yo, I totally didn't think of it that way. Or my mind is blown because somebody like you or another practitioner or whatever shares something. I'm like, yo, that's a whole new way for me to frame it. And that part is the difficult part of UDL, right? It's an
Yep.
amazing thing to
Absolutely.
architect, right?
Yep.
But it is difficult to dive those depths, right? And kind of
Absolutely.
explore. And it requires you to be pretty reflective in your work and pretty open to your own self-critique.
Absolutely. And it
yeah.
changes too, right?
It changes
As
all the time. It
technology,
contextually changes.
the first time I taught, in 2003, it looked very, very different. And
Right.
the opportunities, some opportunities were not there. So it's
Yes. Yeah.
but I think that's when people experience something as simple as multiple formats, right?
Mhm.
For example. And for some of them, it's not the barrier that we usually think about when we think about barriers. For some, it might be something contextual. It's like a circumstantial barrier.
Yep.
So they would, some students of my students would come to me and say, I was driving to my relatives this week, and I really, really appreciated having this MP3 option because I could listen to it as I was in the car or I was on a train. And you start to think about it and you start to understand and really appreciate that, yes, UDL does a lot of wonderful things to those who really, really need those barriers removed.
Mm-hmm.
But the barriers are also such a broad concept.
Yes.
It can be something related to, disability, to, backgrounds, to preferences, to all of these
convenience.
things.
Yeah.
But it could be something as simple as, well, I'm a parent and I had to be at my son's soccer game and I couldn't review your video in the original format, but I printed out the script and I read through it as I was watching my son's soccer game.
Right.
And I think that's when people start to appreciate it. And then the best part to me is that if they are these pre-service and service teachers, then they take it to their classroom.
Absolutely.
Because they've benefited from
Absolutely.
it.
They've experienced it. And I think that's the interesting thing about when we talk about learning barriers and that UDL busts them. Oftentimes, and then people who are hearing it for the first time, they're like, I have to focus on every barrier.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's the wrong way to look at
exactly
UDL as a barrier buster. What it is an opportunity maker, right? Like I'm never going to be able, if I never have a blind student in my classroom, it's really hard for me to design for a student who is hard of sight or is blind completely, right? Like I can't design for that, but I can design environments of opportunity, and I can then add in as like more specific, interventions or supports or whatever that may be needed that is co-designed by that student, right? That to me, so barrier, like the idea of barrier, we need to look at it as how do I design opportunities for that single mom or for that kid that has a 3-hour bus ride or whatever, a 2-hour bus ride. I know students in rural areas that they don't get home from school till 6:00 at night.
Yep.
Right. Well, if we have a MP3 version or a voice version or Google LM's podcast version, if we have that of our parts of our lessons with a transcript, well, that student can follow along to that, right? Or they can pick it up and they're like, I'm not getting something. I don't want to have to go through my entire notes for the semester, right? Because I only need this one piece. Oh, I can listen to this piece and hear it again. And you were doing that, and I agree with you because I was doing the same thing. Like I already have it. Why not just throw it in, right? Like I'll give you just all of the stuff and you choose just what you need, right? And we were doing that way before we had AI that could generate that. Now AI can generate those things, and I just have to go back and check and make sure that they do those supports, right? Right. But also, like, it's doing it with pre-service teachers is so very important. I did a lot of work with new induction, or new teacher induction, the process and working with pre-service teachers as they made the bridge between the two, and living it and experiencing it is much different. And actually, that's when they walked away with like, oh. So, mine was specifically around students in emotional dysregulation, but it's not just that a kid's being bad, quote unquote. It's that they're experiencing something completely different than what I am. Right. And then here are supports that help with that. And actually, I know those supports help with my other students who don't voice their dysregulation. Right. So I do want to hit this question as we kind of talk through things. Educational research just traditionally, it's like, just by its very nature, it tries to just minimize variability, right? But in UDL, we take a look at that variability as we just spoke, and we say, well, that's actually a strength, right? So like in the context of your research and your design and measuring the success of UDL interventions and talking with pre-service teachers and working with them, there have got to be non-traditional data points that you look at, right? Because UDL doesn't fit many traditional data points. Like I said, because they try to minimize the variability. So I'm just, especially around agency and persistency, I'm just wondering, could you give me an example of those non-traditional data points that you kind of take a look at?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I know what you mean by non-traditional data points, but I actually think that that's the first step is to really, to me, UDL, as we said, is so complex, right? Yeah. And to tell you the truth, when I was struggling, could I still be successful? Probably yes. It would take me much longer. It would be much harder. I would have to do all these other things. but I probably could eventually be somewhat successful, right?
Yeah.
So to me, and this is where I'm not sure if I agree with the term non-traditional, but I totally hear your question, because to me it's not. Learning outcomes are extremely important, and I will always advocate for that. But to me, UDL is so much more than just the learning outcomes.
Right.
Do I think that students can still learn if it's a traditional sort of boring instruction like the one I was used to from my background, when a teacher is just standing by the board and they just, yell at you and make sure you memorize or you write, words 300 times? Potentially students could still learn, some students could still learn in that environment, right?
Sure.
But I think the key, the bottom line is how engaged students are, how persistent they are, and where it takes you in the long run.
Oh, I love that.
So it's really this combination. So the way I've looked at it in my research is this combination of, yes, learning outcomes, but also behavioral outcomes.
Right.
And also motivation and engagement. So as an example, one way that I use UDL principles in my work with my colleagues here at George Mason is that we developed this innovative technology-based writing intervention to support students who struggle with writing to organize and compose high-quality essays. Right. And we developed this tool, and it's wonderful, and it has all this supports and bells and whistles. Now, could we teach students without this technology, without this supports to organize their ideas? We probably could. And we actually do have a lot of interventions that show us that, yeah, you can do that. But what technology does, in my opinion, or our specific intervention, is that it does add to that motivation. We have educational games built in as sort of remediation activity.
Sure.
We now have this AI component where it supports the learners without doing the work for the learners.
Yes, thank you.
Kind of like looking at that agency that you've brought up. So to me, we are definitely looking at the learning outcomes. Was the quantity and quality of writing? Has it changed? Has the quality and quantity of writing changed, improved? Because we obviously, that's the whole point, right? We want to make sure that our intervention improves the writing outcome. But we're also looking at time on task, time spent brainstorming, planning brainstorming. We'll look at the motivation. How motivated are students to do something like this?
Okay.
Because to me, what this does is that looking at these measures or data points in a more comprehensive way. So it's not just the learning outcomes, but it's like a system of data points. To me, what it does is that if they are excited and engaged in something like this, that means that the next time they are asked to write an essay, they will be just more willing to do it.
Right. They'll steer away from task aversion.
Exactly.
Yes.
Versus not wanting to do it, not wanting to start,
or
not
having to slug through it. Yeah, having to just get through it because the external motivation is I need to pass this class, or I need to find a job, and like this is on the career path to doing so.
Yeah.
Right? But there is a passion, like the task is something that I can do, right? I will tell you, like, it's obvious to all our listeners out there, if they've heard more than our episodes, that I am a person with a pretty large neurosparkle, right? And so writing has always been just a slug for me. Like, it's just a problem to get through. It's not that I don't like reading. I love reading. And it's not that I don't have thoughts. I do. But just the act of writing, the actual checklist of writing is just so overwhelming to me, right? So if there are things that you are looking at these things through maybe it's not different data points, but they're different lenses as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that actually, I think, is probably a better way to set it than non-traditional data points. These are different lenses. Motivation lens, the engagement lens, right? The the difficult, like the barriers of neuroinclusivity or whatever they may be.
Yep.
Those different lenses.
And to tell you the
I think that's
truth,
brilliant.
I truly believe that it's not just about UDL research. I think all educational research needs to do this. And I don't know, maybe it's my background in assistive technology. I learned very, very early in my career that you might have the best assistive technology device since the sliced bread.
Yes.
But if the user doesn't want to use it for whatever reason,
what does it matter? Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, what does it matter then?
Improve everything for the user. But if for whatever reason they don't want to use it, then they are not going to use it.
Right.
And
it's beyond novelty. It's not just like novelty. Like sometimes, like you said, there are remedial, like there are games or gamified things that help with, gaining skills or, filling in skill gaps. Most times those educational games, quote unquote, are just there for novelty.
For the novelty, yes.
And they're not really actually helping me in my process. They're just a distraction to take my medicine, so to speak.
That is extremely important. And I think that's where the design part of UDL comes in.
Yes, ma'am, I agree.
It's not just about having something let's say you figured something out, and this brings up what you asked earlier about sort of variability, celebrating variability, right? So UDL is really not, I have a formula, right, for success, and I'm just sticking to it. Tomorrow it's going to look very different.
Yeah.
It may look very different.
Right, exactly.
You might be able to reuse some things, but not necessarily that's going to be true. It's not about finding the formula. It's about that process, that design, continuous cycle, and having that reflection phase and making changes based on that. And when it comes to intervention, like, for example, our writing intervention, it's developing it with this input from users. This
absolutely co-design, 100%.
So important.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the things that's hard as a new like a beginner to UDL practice in understanding is that there is variability. Like student A comes to your class and comes to my class, so there's variability between you and I,
absolutely.
Right? And sometimes that's striking, right? Like Bryan Dean doesn't believe in UDL. Right. And Anya does. Right. It could be that, or it could be subtle. We both believe in UDL, but we interpret the lens a little bit different. So students have to do that. There's context in that. But then there is context within the student. Right. Not only amongst subject area and willingness and excitement about that subject, but also day to day.
Absolutely.
Right. And so you have these dimensions of variability that at first glance seem like they are overwhelming. Well, I cannot account for my student being able to go into Dean's class or, because he doesn't believe the same things. And I cannot account for my student changing every day, right? Yeah. No, you can't. And that's why your focus isn't in UDL design, in my opinion, your focus isn't only on students. It's also on environments of opportunity and letting the student have the agency to choose those things, which is interesting when you're trying to design research.
And there are challenges with that.
Sure, I can't imagine.
100%. But I feel like the field is moving towards sort of trying to address some of the challenges. One of them, of course, is this whole fidelity of implementation. As you said, it's not going to look the same in our classrooms. So
we've been struggling with that for 40 years.
Yeah. So how do we compare that, right? In this research and this golden standard of research that we learned that it has to be, everything is supposed to be controlled and it's going to be the same. And then we will compare. But I think like the reporting criteria that was published about just what do we need to include? If you are conducting research on UDL, the reporting criteria is there to guide you, right? And to say, okay, if you are conducting UDL research, these are the things that you need to make sure to include in your publication.
Right.
So then if there is someone replicating your study, they know sort of a little bit more about this process of coming up with some of these decisions versus just some descriptions of this is what I did. And I think that's important. That's good. That's definitely moving the field forward. And I think that there are still a lot of questions, but that's what makes it exciting.
Well, that's what research is for, right?
Exactly.
Like it's for answering some questions that lead to deeper questions.
Exactly.
Right. And
exactly.
I think I'm going to call you out right now, Anya. I'm going to call you out right now because you're like, I'm not sure. When I asked you that question of like, how is it advancing UDL? And you're like, I'm not sure that it advances UDL. I've got to call you out and say, like, you are incredibly humble. Just asking these questions and putting these questions into practice and building a model that takes into account these different pieces is moving UDL research forward. Like, just at its very core, not just the findings, not just what you published, but the actual process and being transparent about that process and the target audience, like your target audience of pre-service teachers, that moves UDL forward, right? Because you have this young group of teachers who are ready to stay until 10 o'clock at night planning their lessons. And you infuse them with the agency of UDL and the power of UDL, right? You got to stop being modest. You got to take some credit for that.
Well,
now.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I really enjoy engaging with our UDL research community in these discussions. And I think there are plenty of opportunities to explore more. So if anyone is listening to this and they are considering going into research or in their early stages of research careers, we need you guys. We need more hands on deck to move us forward.
And new perspectives, right? And new perspectives.
Absolutely.
So that brings me to the future talk. And so I'm going to ask you as we start to wrap up, 5 years, right? Next 5 years, right? It's most critical gap in UDL research that you see.
That's a tough question.
I know.
Because I would love to do so many things, and I wish there was more time in the day to do more things. But I think if I were to pick one area of focus,
give me top three. Give me top three. That's cool. Let's do top three.
Well, I think actually it will come sort of it's one, but it's complex. So it's kind of like one consisting of three. But I actually think that speaking about UDL as a process and as a design, I would love to see more research. And it's not easy. It's not easy. But if I had unlimited resources and
you know, pick your team,
huge team of researchers, I would really want to look into sort of the longitudinal data on UDL. And it is extremely hard, but these long-term outcomes of UDL, because again, I believe that the current research, including some of my own research, it's just inherently, because it's a one study, right? Kind of attempts. Inherently, we are treating UDL as an intervention. Because it's a one study, because you're doing something, right? You intervening, you bringing this UDL based support, and then you're trying to see if it changed the outcomes. And to me, in order for us to look at UDL as a framework, it's really more about the sort of the long term, this again combination of outcomes, learning, cognitive, self-determination, motivation, access, engagement, behaviors, all of that in this complex way to look at it, but really in this long-term way. Because if students experience UDL environment for many years, what does that do to their sort of transition, executive functioning skills, the agency that we talked about, the persistence? sort of in the long term,
Yeah.
in the long run.
And what is a UDL adult, right? Like somebody who's been like it's been through large portions of their education. What do they look like when they enter the workforce?
I think that's a
great.
fascinating question to me, because I feel like that really would get to the bottom of UDL is not something that you can just have one lesson about, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Whether it's university or K-12, right? It's not about one little thing. It's really a mindset. It's
That's the hardest part to capture about it.
And what do we know about that, and what it can improve sort of this longitudinal way to look? And I know that there are school systems that have been implementing UDL successfully for many years. I'm just not sure if the research has been done, sort of this longitudinal research has been done in those initiatives. So I think opportunities are there. So
yeah, for sure.
We just need to find the ways to study that.
Oh, I'm sure people listening, the researchers that are listening, are ready and willing to help find some sites to do that. So, and that is interesting, because it is really, I think that education, compensatory education, really kind of strives for a couple things. Just education in general. I shouldn't say compensatory. Just it strives for two things. It strives for the academic side of it, right? Yes. But then it also strives, at least in our system, it strives for the residuals. And sometimes we're not very good with the residuals. Like, you know, what do we want people coming out of K-12, compensatory K-12 education to have as skill sets, right? We want them to be aware of the global market or the global field or the world, right? We want them to be decent citizens. We want them to be researchers, and we want them to ask critical questions. These are all kind of residual skills. They're not explicitly taught, right? There might be a unit or two on writing your research paper, but they're not. But they have to be embodied. And I think that's kind of what you're asking for. UDL is a residual of education, right? It is a progressive framework of learning and pedagogy that strives to really work on those residuals, as well as developing access and on-ramps into the academics.
Absolutely.
That's a massive thing. And to capture that is like trying to boil the ocean. It's massive, and it's hard to do all of that. But a longitudinal study, that sounds like, ooh, like you said, it's a lot of work. It's like a magnus opus of your career. But what an amazing study it would be. Like, it would be it would be one of those foundational pieces that kind of sets things. So I've got to tell you, I've got to ask you, it's time to pay some bills, right? And so I've got to ask you, where can people find out more about you, or find your research, or if they want to explore what you're working on, how do they get in contact with you, and where can they look?
Absolutely. I'll be more than happy to share the information, my contact information. I am always super excited to hear from anyone, practitioners, researchers, anybody who wants to collaborate. I also will be happy to share the website for the UDL-based writing intervention package that I mentioned.
Yes, I would love that. We'll put it in the show notes.
It is absolutely free. Teachers, practitioners around the country, the world can use it. You just increased
your hits on that site by saying it was free. You just went through the roof on your SEO. So that's nice.
But I'll be happy to share all that information with you, and you can share it with.
Yeah, we'll put it in the notes. And then I have to say, so it's pretty obvious, folks, as to why Anya is our UDL Con 2025 Research and Practice David Rose Award winner. And if you have somebody that you want to nominate out there in podcast land, applications are open for all of our awards. So we have the Innovation Award, Innovative Practice Award, we have the Research Award, and we have the Implementation Award. All of those are out there. You can go to our website at cast.org and UDLCon to find the nominations. Then they'll be reviewed. But that's open until April 23rd. So make sure that you get those nominations in. Make it tough for our reviewers this year, like it was tough for our reviewers last year. Did you ever find out, Anya, who nominated you?
I think I have an idea.
You have an idea.
I have to say, I was actually on the review committee the first year.
I know.
And then I wasn't invited the second year.
I remember
this. And I kind of felt bad. And I was like, what did I do?
Did I do something wrong? It's
did
just
I
that
not do a good job?
No,
and then when I found out about the nomination, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, I do remember that story. And you telling me it, and I was like, oh, no, I would feel the same way. I'd be like, wait a minute, did I screw up? Did I not review very well? And then you turn out to be the winner and nominee. So it's fantastic. It's been fantastic talking with you. I could talk with you forever. We unfortunately have to put a cap on the episode. But what's up next? Is there anything going on next? Or are you just chugging along?
Plugging along. Yes,
just making a better world. Just making a better world like a superhero. I dig it. I dig it. Well, Anya, thank you so much for the conversation. We'll post this up, folks. Again, this is another one of those secret stash, one of those bonus episodes that we keep in the vaults, and I'm sure you can see why. So as always, I'm Bryan Dean, and as I always say, peace, love, and belly rubs. We'll talk to y'all later.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Learning Experience Podcast. We are so glad you're part of this conversation.
And if you're like me and today's episode sparked some ideas or got your brain flowing, well, just remember there's so much more to explore out there.
And remember that CAST is leading the way when it comes to accessibility, workforce innovation, professional development, and research.
So visit cast.org to dive deeper. That's cast.org, and keep learning with us.